was a lovely spring morning when we started out from New York in the Black Hawk with a crew of two, Bill and Otto, my father, as grand a skipper as ever yelled shove off, and myself. The idea of the whole trip was a birthday present for my dad. He was 76 the day we sailed. Pop had lived 60 years of his life on the 7 seas, and if there'd been 8, Pop would have sailed them. As an apprentice boy on a clipper ship, he made his first voyage round Cape Horn. My present to him was a voyage back over those same waters. And boy, was he happy as we headed down to the sea again. The Black Hawk was 48 feet of solid oak timber. That sounds like a lot of feet, but there was a lot of ocean lying down the Hudson and beyond the bay, and we intended going around it all. There's a lot of work on a boat, and if the captain's a skipper like Pop, he doesn't ease up on you because you're a girl. But who's afraid of work if you can be sailing? So we left New York, waved goodbye to Miss Liberty in America, bound down to Rio in the Spanish Main, ready to take what came, storm and gale, sunshine and starlight, and best of all, adventure. It's one thing to start sailing, it's another to keep sailing. Finding a port in a wind and tide-swept ocean is man's work. But a girl can do it if she's a sailor. There's deck work too, but navigation comes first. Davy Jones has a big locker, and it's a good thing to stay out of. The dog is Captain Jack, as white inside as he is out. My father tended to most of the deck work at the start, 76 years young. Boy, I sure hope I feel like Pop when I'm 76. So I charted a course for the Caribbean Sea and Spanish Main. But it's not all navigation and charts in sailing a schooner. We'd gone southward for several days, and suddenly one night, that big Atlantic Ocean began acting rough. Sailors sleep heavily. They only get 4 hours of it at a stretch, and they never know what may happen while they sleep. When Captain Jack, sensing a storm, jumped up on my bunk and woke me, I was just about as scared as Jack was. When you're shaken out of a sailor's sleep and dropped out of your bunk by a rolling sea, you're not exactly ready for trouble. Those clouds I could see through the hatchway looked like man-sized trouble. To be exact, a Caribbean hurricane, the worst storm the Atlantic knows. The Black Hawk was new to us, and all ships being ladies and temperamental, we didn't know how she'd behave. So I put on the oilskins and started up on deck. Ocean sent us spinning like a chip in a whirlpool as we tried to keep the Black Hawk head-on in that 90-mile-an-hour gale. One of the dangers of a schooner in a storm is her rigging. Let a block stick or a rope break so you can't reef a sail, and the strain of the wind cracks your mast like a matchstick. A sailor's life depends on a strand of half-inch rope. And the ropes and rigging of the Black Hawk were new and untried. From the wheel came the order, reef the foresail. If we couldn't get it down, the mast would go. and Bill were thrown across the slanting deck and clung together to keep from going over. The boom, swinging, struck Bill, knocked him unconscious and overboard. I couldn't see an ex-United States Marine pass on like that, not while a girl could swim. There was nothing for it but I go after him, so I went. We remained afloat for what seemed hours until Pop was finally able to bring the Black Hawk about and eventually throw us a rope so we could get back on board. Next day, outside of the damage to the Black Hawk, the sea was as calm and peaceful as if nothing had happened. We saw we weren't the only ones who'd come off second best in fights with Caribbean hurricanes. All around us were ships that through the years had taken the count. Gallant old clippers that had sailed the Spanish Main for the last time. Bones of ships from Port Said and Gibraltar and Zanzibar, rotting on Caribbean reefs, silent and ghost-like tragedies of the sea. Somehow they still looked brave. They hadn't gone to the bottom. They still kept their old spars and decks in the sun and the sea wind. Pop had an idea. We could use those KO'd sisters of the sea. We needed a new mast for the broken one on the Black Hawk. All his life, Pop had taken what he wanted from the sea. And here was something we needed, ready for the taking. I set Bill and Otto rowing over to one of the wrecks to get a mast. And in the meantime, Pop and I had another idea. There were masts in this graveyard of lost ships. There must be other things. We could use a lot of new outfit for the Black Hawk, rigging, ropes, and a few blocks. We decided to visit one of the other wrecks. Bill and Otto were okay on their job, so we started out in the other lifeboat. We had our eye on a big Spanish ship that looked well over 100 years old. Hard on any woman to sit on one spot for 100 years, especially if she's used to traveling. I felt kind of sorry for that proud old ship that had dropped her last anchor. So while Bill and Otto were getting the mast for the Black Hawk, Pop and I rowed to that old Spaniard's side. She looked a little dangerous. Gosh, haunted even, with the empty holes in her side staring at us like eyes in a skull. There was no telling what was inside. We decided to look, go in, and take our chances. Pop kept looking, dreaming, I suppose, of days when he'd sail clipper ships like this one, only full-rigged and full of sail. A gleam of metal where the captain's cabin had been had caught my eye. There lay a jumbled heap of steel and brass. I realized that this old ship must have been a gun runner for some Spanish filibuster. There were the rusted barrels of ancient muskets and the iron scabbards of old cutlasses and swords. Anyhow, her sinking here had made one less revolution in the Caribbean. Handling those swords was like putting your fingers around the hand of a ghost. Some steel maker in far-off Toledo had fashioned them and sent them on from Spain. While Pop and I were looking about our wreck, Bill and Otto had made good on the job. They'd salvaged a swell 50-year-old mast for the Black Hawk. 50 feet of it. I didn't realize it then, but that stick saved our lives later on. In digging through those broken old blades, I found what looked like the captain's sea chest. He must have left it there when he abandoned the ship in the storm that wrecked him. I called to Pop to come and help me. I thought I might find something in it that would explain the tragedy of this lost ship. It was deep down under the gun, probably wedged there when the ship struck the reef and sank. Time had played tricks with the metal of that old box, but it was still fairly strong and as heavy as lead. They built well in those old days. We had to force the lid open. I had no idea the contents would be intact, but they were, safe and untouched in that chest for 100 years. The precious belongings of a man long since gone. There was a compass there, covered with the dust of a century, and the ship's logbook. The last entry read, "If I do not survive this storm, and anyone should find this log, in my coat pocket is the map of the river and ruined city." And sure enough, there was a map. Its ink faded, but still clear enough to read. It described the hiding place of a great square emerald. Back on the Black Hawk, I studied that logbook and map. They told of a forbidden jungle river, the Rio Dulce, in far-off Central America. I had a sudden idea. We'd come to sea, Pop and I, looking for adventure. Why not have a good look? Why not search for the great emerald this old Spanish captain had hidden? And that's just what I decided to do. In my mind was engraved a picture of that map. It showed a plan of an underground passage, a ruined city, a temple of idols, and in back of the central idol on the wall was marked an X. And he had written, "A great square emerald so big and so green men die looking at its beauty." Gosh, all this passed through my mind while I was changing the course. Pop felt the Black Hawk turning in the wind and came up on deck to find out why. I couldn't tell him I was going to search for the emerald that Spanish captain had buried. Old seamen are superstitious about dead men's treasure. So when he asked me, "What's the idea?" I called to him, "It's all right, Pop. It's a birthday surprise. Tell you later." So we headed south and west in the Black Hawk toward the forbidden jungle river, Rio Dulce. We sailed steadily for days until one morning the wind had died and we lay motionless on a glassy sea. It's a long way to Central America, and it takes a lot of meals to feed hungry sailors, especially when you're a sailor, navigator, and skipper, as well as chief cook and bottle washer. The galley pump had never behaved badly before. I couldn't understand what was wrong with it. I knew our water cask should be at least half full. I was worried, and I could see the look of worry on Pop's face. As an old sailorman, he knew one of the greatest dangers of the sea was shortage of water. I didn't yet believe there was anything really wrong, and Pop didn't either. But he started up on deck to measure the water tank, and I stayed behind to think. Standing there in the cabin, I realized suddenly what had happened. In the storm we'd been through, the pitching of the schooner in the giant waves had thrown the Black Hawk's spare anchor against the water tank, and it had sprung a leak. Ever since, our water, more precious to us than gold, had been seeping away in the hold. There was not a drop of water on the Black Hawk. Even before Pop pulled his measuring string out of the tank, I knew what his finding would be. Dry as a bone. We were absolutely becalmed. No current, no wind, our sails flapping lifelessly. We had no way to get the 30 miles to the nearest shore and water. Our only hope was for rain. We stretched canvas on the deck, put a funnel in our water tank, and did what every sailor man does sometime. We waited. The third day came. The third day without water. Not one on board who didn't believe a hoodoo was on us. Maybe Pop was right about not fooling around with dead men's belongings. I knew our only hope was to reach that windjammer. One more day without water would finish us. If she wouldn't come to us, we'd have to go to her. It was life or death now. A forlorn hope that in spite of our exhausted condition, Bill and I could row across those miles of sea and bring help back to my father and Otto. Bill and I put our last dying strength into those oars, while Pop and Otto waited and hoped helplessly on the Black Hawk. But we were too exhausted. After what seemed hours of agony, that last hope for water still seemed almost as far away as ever. And as night came on, Bill and I gave up and drifted. When morning came, I found we had drifted ashore on an island. Hope came back. If there were land, there must be water. Through the trees, I saw a hut. I pulled together what last strength I had and climbed from the boat. I was thinking of Pop and Otto, waiting and dying back on the Black Hawk, and of faithful, slow old Bill, unconscious there in the lifeboat. Somehow, I managed to stagger up from the beach toward the hut. There seemed to be no one around. I called once, but no answer came back. But I knew if there were people there to build a hut, there must be water. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the leaves. I turned in terror, for I realized that snake was a fer-de-lance, one of the deadliest snakes in the world. The hut seemed the nearest place of escape, so I ran to it as fast as I could. But I'd used my last strength. that lightning-fast little mongoose, deadliest enemy of all snakes, had saved me. As I got up out of that hut, I wanted to call, "Thanks, mongoose, old boy. I'll do something for you someday." But all I could do was walk weakly to a coconut tree and lean against it. Glad of the air, glad of the sunshine, glad to be alive. And then I saw what I'd hoped to see all along, a native. Did you ever try to shout when you hadn't a drink in 3 days and your mouth was full of cotton? Try it sometime. You can do it if you have to. I never was so glad to see anybody in my life as I was to see that old native. He didn't seem at all surprised to see me. He came calmly wading up to where I was standing. I tried to tell him I wanted water, that we were dying for water, that my throat was parched, that unless we had water we couldn't live, that Bill was unconscious back in the boat. He got the idea after a time, but he thought I wanted milk instead of water. He made for a coconut tree. Nothing ever tasted better to me in my life than that drink of coconut milk. It was water, nectar, wine, all in one. But I couldn't stop to have more. I wanted to get some back to Bill as quickly as I could. So I had the native open another with his big can opener. I took it and asked him to bring the rest and follow me to where the lifeboat and Bill were lying on the beach. I found Bill still out, but being a leatherneck, Bill could always smell a drink. But I bet he never had one in the Marines that tasted as good as this one. Fresh milk from Mother Nature's own can. We knew Papa and Otto were suffering back on the Black Hawk. So we pushed off into the surf with a boatload of coconuts and water from a clear, cool spring from which we'd filled our barrel. Stronger and with fresh life in our bodies, we started from shore on a long pull back to the schooner. We knew we wouldn't mind the road this time. We were bringing water and life to those who needed it. Goodbye, Gunga Din. We'll do something for you, too, someday. Every other Monday is wash day at sea, provided it doesn't rain. Sailors have wash days the same as everybody else, and they have the biggest bathtub in the world to do it in. Captain Jack got his. Lavender soap, if you please, and bathed by the skipper. By the way Bill shaved, you'd think he had a leather foot instead of a leather neck. Slow old Bill was just a barber at heart. Otto, scrubbing the Black Hawk herself, seemed to see something he couldn't quite understand. He called Bill's attention to the Black Hawk's new storm sail. Bill, having experience as a Marine, wasn't so sure it was a storm sail. He called it a reefer. The only reason for the new sail was that yours truly wanted to take a bath. trouble with these baths at sea is the wind. And how can a sailor girl come out of her tub without a hat? The only gentleman on board was good old Jack. My sailors were no gentlemen, making fun of a lady that way. And I suppose a lady is no lady either when she goes to sea. And finally we reached our destination, the mouth of the forbidden Rio Dulce. It looked weird, that river, and savage. Strange birds swept across it. I thought of a great square emerald that was the eye of a god as the Black Hawk dropped anchor in the glassy water. An emerald so big and so green, men died looking at its beauty. That's what the captain had written on the map. Up that mysterious river perhaps lay a treasure. But I didn't want Pop to know what was in my mind just yet. If he knew I was going to do anything like that, he'd try to stop me. His old superstition of the sea said to leave dead men's treasures alone. Only slow, steady Bill knew about it, and I could trust Bill. So I told Pop I was merely going on shore to look around, and he gave me a compass in case we went inland. Then that the head man of the village, Manola, who'd been carefully watching every move, came over to me. He told me in sign language, mixed with Spanish, that before I could do any more trading or go farther into the country, I must go to see Maya, the woman chieftain of the tribe. It was a little hard to understand him at first. He tried to tell me that Maya's palace was quite a distance away. Finally, I gathered that 2 fingers across the other meant a ride. Well, that was all right with me and with Bill, too. So we started out with Manola to call on the Princess Maya. I didn't exactly like the idea of approaching that 1-mule power vehicle. This man Manola didn't look any too pleasant either. But with Bill along, I knew I could bank on the Marines. Anyhow, I had to do it. Apparently, getting Maya's permission was the only way to get up the Rio Dulce. Down here, the men seemed to do the embroidery work for their bolero jackets. A new idea to Bill and the Marines. He gave a regular leatherneck laugh and got us in bed right away. On under an arch as old as the ages, an arch built of green and red stones rising against a blue sky. Around me, following in a silent and curious crowd, were the descendants of the men who had built that arch. Looking at them now, it seemed impossible that primitive hands like theirs had raised that perfect curve into the sky. We finally approached the gates of Princess Maya's garden. I was thinking fast. I knew these people had a deep respect for their ancestors and their gods, and I must be very careful in the story I told Maya. If she suspected my real object was to obtain that great square emerald the Spanish captain had hidden, she would never let me leave the coast. I told her then I'd come to help her people. I believed there were rich minerals up the Rio Dulce near a ruined city. If she would permit me to go there and test the rocks, I would turn anything I found over to her tribe. Maya said this city was sacred to her ancestors, that white men had gone there before, desecrated it, and died. It was a story that 100 years ago a captain from the sea had stolen the great square eye of an idol and hidden it before he fled. I protested I merely wanted to help her people. And after warning me that if I betrayed her, I should die, she bowed her head and said, "I will take you there." It was then Manola spoke. He begged the princess not to trust us. We were white, we were evil, we meant no good. I listened breathlessly as he pleaded with her. Maya told him she'd given her word to take us and must keep us. And, she added, I have promised them death if they've lied to me. She turned to us then and said the ruined city was many suns away. How did we intend to reach it? I had an idea for that. I told her if she would build me a contraption, a boat made of 3 large canoes with a floor and a roof, we could all go together. I got a piece of chalk from Bill and started to draw a picture of what I meant. There must be bamboo upright and palm leaves to keep off the sun. She watched carefully as I drew the queer boat in which I hoped to go up the Rio Dulce. 2 days later, my drawing became an accomplished fact. We had our contraption. We loaded it with everything we thought we'd need. Best of all was an outboard motor we brought from the Black Hawk that we picked up in Jamaica. We brought plenty of gasoline for the motor, a whole drum full. We weren't sure how far we'd have to go. And all the time Manola and his boyfriends watched us from the bank. I could see he'd turned thumbs down on the whole trip and was suspicious about it all. I really couldn't blame him. Unknown to us, back on the shore, Manola decided to follow. Suspicious, distrustful, with 3 of his men, he launched a dugout canoe. Not knowing our every move was to be watched, Maya, Bill, and I started up the forbidden Rio Dulce, which means Sweet River. weaver bird's nest, the queerest homes in the world. An iguana, the egg robber of the jungle. A coati, the jungle policeman, and the deadly enemy of the iguana. Bill had never seen such swift justice even in the Marines. It strikes fast in the jungle, and when it strikes, it's permanent. Here was one iguana that would never go robbing weaver birds' nests again. And I imagine those birds were just as happy about it as I was. All at once, we saw something moving in the underbrush. Wild pigs. We thought a side of fresh bacon wouldn't go bad at all. Reliable old Bill got out his rifle. But before he could get it to his shoulder, or even think about it, those wise little pigs ran screaming into the underbrush. Anyhow, it was just as well. Bill found out later he had left all his ammunition back on the Black Hawk. Watching the shore, I finally glimpsed what I'd been waiting for. The ruins of San Martinez, the fort of the old conquistadores, were built on the narrowest part of the river to blockade the pirate fleet. These ruins were the first landmark on the map that I'd found. We'd reached our river journey's end. What I didn't know was that Manola had reached the fort ahead of us. went on to that old ruined fort, through great stone walls built to withstand hand-to-hand attacks and gunfire. I wondered how many brave men had died here before the jungle itself beat the conquistadores. But all the time as we passed wall after wall, I was looking for something I had to find. On my map, in a secret wall in the fort, was marked an underground tunnel. It was necessary to pass through this tunnel to reach the ruined city where the idol stood and where the emerald was hidden. But in that maze of old wall and tumbled rocks, it seemed an impossible thing to find. I knew that it must be there. Everything else so far had been exactly as the map had shown, and I'd had the story from Maya that an emerald had been stolen. Then Maya reminded us that time makes changes in this savage interior, whose only inhabitants seemed to be vultures and alligators and snakes. Oh, how I hated snakes. And it was through her help that we found a passage, hidden by the growth of a century. If the truth must be told, I was frightened, but I tried not to show it. And besides, I wasn't actually hurt. And best of all, I'd finally found the entrance to the tunnel I'd been searching for. Somewhere beyond, somewhere under the earth, lay the path to the ruined city. But May had been thinking. With her superstitious mind, she'd seen signs in all we'd passed through. The buzzards had signified death. Alligator had hissed for us to turn back. And now this snake, this boa constrictor, had put its coils around my neck to keep me from going farther. The signs were wrong. The jungle had spoken. We must not go on. I told her these things were merely coincidences, that there was nothing wrong. And anyhow, I was an American girl, and having come this far, I intended to go on. Reluctantly, she agreed to follow us through the tunnel. We found a calendar carved in stone, as permanent as time itself. These calendars were erected every 5 years, and recorded in rock was the history of those years for the ages. And then we came to a great frog god, which Maya told us was the stone father of the first frog. Suddenly we entered a great hall that only hinted at the glories of the past, and we gazed in astonishment at a swimming pool made of marble in the shape of a boat that told of ancient luxuries. After a time that I would never reach my goal. The city was too vast, too big, ever hoped to find the temple and the idol marked on my map. We'd come what seemed miles through ruined buildings and streets in this city of the dead. And then Maya, who vaguely remembered all this when she'd seen it as a child, pointed far ahead to a crumbling mass of marble. It was a temple, the Temple of the Sun. Maya told us she wanted to kneel before it for a moment of silent worship to the gods of her ancestors. A curious combination of Christian and pagan belief. What I didn't know was that behind us, Manoel and his men were following. I could see at a glance that this was the place. There, to the right of the idol, somewhere in the wall, a captain of the sea had hidden the great square emerald, so big and so green men died looking at its beauty. I motioned Bill to get Maya out of the way if he could, so I could have a look alone at that wall. We left the idol, pretending to have no interest in it. The princess still trusted us, and I knew if I could get her out of the way for a few minutes, I'd have my chance. For once, slow old Bill had caught on. He began to play his part like a gentleman. He started talking with the princess about Spanish and Mayan architecture. Not that he knew anything about it, but he could ask questions. Maya was either interested or flattered. As Bill pointed out parts of buildings, she began talking with him. And so I sneaked away, bound for the idol and the emerald, while the two had their backs turned. The noise I'd made carried in the stillness of that dead city. Bill tried to pass it off by pretending he made it with his rifle. The princess was uneasy. She felt there was something wrong about this whole business. When I saw Maya, I had lied to her. I had desecrated the god of her ancestors. I didn't want to fight with her. I knew I was wrong. That's why I ran. captive, I was taken back down the Rio Dulce, the sweet river. I knew what my chances were. The princess had warned me, if you betray me, you die. In my greed to obtain that great square emerald, I'd broken the rules. I'd violated trust. I didn't want to die. Steadily, that raft had taken me down to the town, and word had gone on ahead. The toller of the bells was calling the whole countryside to my execution. The ceremony was over. I struggled helplessly as the Princess Maya pronounced my death sentence. You have betrayed us. Therefore, you shall be burned alive for desecrating the idol of our ancestors. Out of nowhere, like a streak of lightning, came Old Bill. He moved under cover of the smoke while every head was bowed. In a second, he cut the ropes that tied me, and the next, he was head over heels in a desperate fight for our lives. the Black Hawk, Pop was getting impatient. We had been gone 5 days, and still no signs of us up the river. If ever I prayed that outboard motor wouldn't play tricks, it was now. Our lives depended on its starting, and it did. Then the motor stopped. I had an idea, a forlorn hope that might hold off those natives for a time. We had that big drum of gasoline. Now was the time to use it. Frantically, Bill swung his axe. Those racing canoes were coming closer every second. Unless we could hold them off, it meant death. And all we had to hold them off with was fire. I intended to burn the river, to lay a wall of flames between us and the natives, hoping that we could drift to the Black Hawk at the mouth of the river, not far away. Flames were spreading, not across the river behind us, as I'd hoped, but around us. The wind and tide had played tricks with that floating gasoline. We were surrounded by a circle of fire. It grew hotter and hotter. Our clothes began to smoke from its heat. We should be burned to death after all, unless we could escape. It might be possible to swim downriver away from the bewildered natives. But there was no plunging into those flames. They were too hot, too deadly. I suddenly thought of one way by which it might be possible to get into the water. If we could chop a hole in the bottom of the contraption, we could dive through the hole, swim underwater, and come up beyond the fire. I told Bill to swing his axe as he'd never swung one before. Back on the Black Hawk, Pop and Otto saw the smoke and fire upriver. They knew at last something was wrong. Bill had chopped the hole through. The flames were burning us now. I could feel my hair scorching. Judging the position of the Black Hawk downriver, we prepared to dive for an underwater swim beyond the fire. Dulce's a sweet river. There still lies a great square emerald, so big and so green men die looking at its beauty. I hadn't looked at its beauty, but I had looked on death, and I'd had enough of natives and jungle and death. All I wanted now was to get on with Pop's birthday present. So we sailed away without my great square emerald. And anyhow, what real sailor girl cares about green emeralds when she can be sailing on the green seas?